Hey guys, welcome back to new video in the tutorial series Introduction to Kubernetes. Today we are going to learn about volumes in Kubernetes. About me, I am Jainish, a software developer. These are the links you can use to follow me on GitHub, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So what is volume? Now Kubernetes by default now uses the Docker volume. In Docker, so when you start a container, if your container or your application inside your container needs a volume or directory, usually it's ephemeral in the nature, which means if you kill the container, your files inside that container in that particular directories are gone. So that's why Docker came up with the volume. Now Docker volume is nothing but just a directory on the node or on the host operating system, which is accessible to a container at the runtime, right? But the life cycle of Docker volume is pretty simple, not managed as well. So Kubernetes on top of the Docker volume, they added functionality and they enhanced the lifestyle or life cycle of the volume. So Kubernetes volume is essentially a directory accessible to all container running inside the pod. Right now, Kubernetes allow a different way to create volumes. But for two things to keep in mind that this volume uh, can be accessible across the different containers even after restart. So this is how Kubernetes manages the volume. So let's say if you have two container inside a pod, they both can access the same volume. So that's how it makes it easy. For example, if you have Nginx and if you have your web application and you want to add both data of both the container in the same volume, you can achieve that with Kubernetes volume. Now, Kubernetes have different types of volume. So first is the node local type, basically empty directory. So you can create an empty directory on the host and you can attach it at a runtime to a container inside the pod. Same way host path. Host path is nothing but a location of directory on your host OS, which is accessible to pod at runtime. Now, if you have multiple pod running on different nodes, which means the host path will create directory on whatever node the pod is running. So in that case, you want to use node affinity to make sure that your container always runs or your pod always runs on the same Kubernetes node. Then there is a file sharing type. Uh, for example, let's say if you have Kubernetes cluster that you are running on your data center and you want to preserve all your data to something which is not inside the Kubernetes, then you can spin up an NFS server, which is network file system, and you can create a volume there and attach it to your Kubernetes pod at the runtime. So this way, even if your Kubernetes cluster dies, your data or your files are stored in NFS server. Then some cloud provider specific type. So Kubernetes works now with all the different cloud provider to create volume, be it AWS, be it Azure, or be it Google Cloud. And there are many more cloud now supported, with the data with the persistent volume. Then distributed file system. So some of on-prem distributed file systems are GlusterFS or SafeFS. These are the way you can create volume, or you can create a volume to persist your data in this two on-prem file storing distribution system. Then there are some spatial purpose types like secrets and ConfigMap we already learned about in our previous video. Those are used to store configuration or sensitive data. So let's get started and let's create our own volume. So I already have the volume checked out. I have uploaded the code into my GitHub repository Introduction to Kubernetes inside the directory called volume. So we will be using the same node version application. Now we are using deployment type in this case, but at the end of the deployment, I am asking it to create a volume with name logs volume. In this case, we are just using this volume to store the logs of this application. But if you are using like a database, then you might want to preserve data directory. Or if it's Nginx, then some kind of web service which serves the static data, then you might want to use it to store those static data. So depending on use case, you can create a volume for whatever file you want to preserve. Now in this case, I'm using the host path, and I'm saying that I want to create a directory call where node version logs inside my host operating system. And the type I'm setting it to directory or create, which means make sure if directory is not there, it will create this directory, right? And then rest, I'm deploying this version of my node version Docker image, and here is the path where I'm mounting it inside a container, because inside a container my logs are being written in this directory. So I'm mounting that path with this directory on the host operating system. So let's get started. I will do kubectl apply -f with a deployment to create the deployment. Then I will also create the service. Now let's do get all. So we will see that uh, deployment, service, and pods are created. Pod is still in the running state. So let's see if the pod is ready now. Okay, pod is still in the running state. Let's describe the pod. And when we describe the pod, you will see that it mounts this volume, which is the directory that we have specified, to a volume called logs volume. And log volume is nothing but a host path that we have specified in our deployment configuration. Like, I think the pod is healthy now. Great. So let's do this. Let's see if the volume is created. Sorry. So you can do that by kubectl get pv. Sorry. Yeah, because it's a host path, it will be created on the runtime in the host. So let's do this. Let's SSH to our Minikube. And if we go to the directory that we have specified to create host path, which is this in our case, and if we do ls, we will see a logs being written here. And if I try to access my node application now, let me open another session. Let me do kubectl get svc, and I will need Minikube IP to access this service. So this is the IP, and along with the pod which is mapped to my pod 80 of my application, I will be able to access the application which is running right now. And if we see, we have got the request. So the file which is being created by container, it's preserved inside Minikube in the host part directory that we have specified. So this is how we can create volume. Now, to learn more about different volumes supported by Kubernetes, you can always go to Kubernetes documentation. These are the different uh, types of volume that Kubernetes supports now. They are always adding more types. So always check this documentation to see any latest addition to volume types. So that's it about the Kubernetes volume. If you have any question, feel free to add your question in the comment. If you like the video, if you have learned something new, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to learn about other objects in Kubernetes. Thank you.